Okay, so I'm just going to keep going down the list in the grading checklist. So the next thing is explosions. So I do have factories for these. I have an explosion base class, and then there's the 1-cell explosion and the 2-cell explosion. I kind of treated the spider sprite score as something different, but it also has a factory. When you the explosion, there's only one explosion factory. It just has 2 different object pools. So there's the 1-cell object pool and the 2-cell object pool. And then the factory has 2 different methods. You can either create a 1-cell explosion or create a 2-cell explosion, and then they get the explosions from the corresponding object pools and initializes them. The initialize is literally just setting the frame to 0, putting in the position. You update the explosion, and then when it's the last frame of the explosion, you mark it for destroy. So when the player, like for instance in the blaster, when the player loses a life, you can just call explosion factory, create 2-cell explosion at that position, like so, and same thing happens with all of the critters. So hopefully that's sufficient for the explosions. For the blaster, I think I went over that pretty well before. Just a recap on the controller. There's only one player controller active in the game. The game manager creates it. So I have, I create the player controller here, and then you just switch between the strategies. So when you're setting the game mode to attractor versus 1 player, this is another strategy pattern. So you call current game mode setup, and you pass it all of this stuff that you need. So if I go to attractor mode setup, you can see that here I get the player manager, player controller, and then I set the player controller mode to the AI strategy. Versus in the 1 player mode, I set the player controller mode to the keyboard strategy. And then that's what's controlling the blaster. So that's how I change back and forth between those. Once again, the player manager owns the, or it creates the player controller, and then you just switch back and forth which pattern you're using when you switch, when you set up the game mode. I went over the blaster earlier. The bullet, I have it as a factory, so it doesn't follow the ship. It's just spawning there. I showed that. So you just, when you fire, you create a bullet. It gets the bullet from the object pool and initializes it. The bullet updates. Yeah, not great. I'm still using the game frame time, but it checks the Y position, and once it reaches the Y position, it marks for destroy, or unless it collides with something before then. Centipede. So let's go over how the centipede works. I feel like this video is going to be very long, and I'm very sorry. So segment is the base class, and it inherits from critter, so there's a bit of a hierarchy going on here. But there's all the movement that is common to both the head and the body. They're going to have something behind them and in front of them. They have the row column, they have a main sprite, they have position, speed, current state, etc. And the command scores for, when they die and stuff. Here's some column and stuff: get row, get column, set state, pass along info, which we'll go over in a second. So, let's see. I talked about how the movement of the head is updated. So how is the movement of the body updated? Well, you every time you move to a new cell, you call the pass along info function. And what that does, it says if there's something actually behind you, it's kind of like a recursive function. You keep passing along the info to the one behind you over and over again all the way back. And then you set the state of the one behind you to your current state. You set the row to your current row, and you set the column to your your current column. So it's just passing that info all the way down the line of linked segments. I guess if I want to go over how the critters are created, or how the centipede is created, just really quickly. It's actually centipede spawner. So when I call sorry, I'm trying to find it. Spawn a new centipede at top. I get a random direction, either left or right, and then I create a new head with nothing behind it. So you can see that the next segment right here is actually null to start, but then I kind of build up this list. I, for however long I want that centipede to be, I keep creating bodies with the row above it, because they kind of spawn in an upwards way at the beginning of the game. And I I kind of do some linked list shenanigans where I make sure everything gets linked in correctly. So I'm creating the head, and then I'm linking in all of these bodies behind it. So that's how the links get established in the first place. And then I pass along the info to the one behind me. So if you look in the body update, it doesn't really have to do much. It just does the move offsets that are given to it for its current state. You reset at the bottom, once you've reached that new thing, and then at that point you will have received your next state, so you're good to go to just keep, updating based on those move offsets. So the bodies really don't have to think, they just they rely on that pass along function from the head. Right. I'm trying to see what I should cover next. I think that is it. I'm gonna cover splitting right now, actually. So what happens when you split? So bullet hit, a centipede segment. So either when you hit a head or a body, it splits. So here is the split function. So first we need to fix the links. So if link is not a head, update the tail to point to null. If the segment's on a tail, create a new segment behind. And then we create the centipede head with all of the information from the segment behind the one you hit, because the one that you hit gets destroyed. But you're going to, give it, you're going to give the speed, the frame, the row, the column, all of the stuff that from the one behind it. But you're going to create the head with all of that information, and then automatically by passing it the link behind, you're linking it into the existing bodies that are already there. And then you are also destroying that body segment behind the one that you hit. You're not only destroying the one that you hit, you're destroying the one behind it, because the head is replacing it right there. So that's the basic functionality of the split. Okay, so I think that just about covers everything about the centipede. I'm going to go over the mushroom now. So mushrooms. They have the factory and object pool recycling. In the region, so let me just cover the mushroom region really fast. So basically what happens is when you lose your life, you create a new mushroom region, and you give it a pointer to the GridManager. So let's go look at what happens in the region. It is a game object, so so you create it, but then you have to actually start it. Is it a game object? Yes. Right, because it needs the alarms. So this is just to give it a little bit of a pause. So you set the alarm, and then you check the next mushroom. So it loops through all of the rows and columns until it finds a mushroom. It checks, hey, is this mushroom's health, has it been damaged or has it been poisoned? If it has, I don't need this here anymore. if it has, you're going to regen the mushroom and, update the row and then set the column again so there's a little bit of space in between moving from mushroom to mushroom. So basically this is looping until it finds a damaged mushroom, it regens it, and then it loops until it finds another damaged mushroom. So that's the only thing that happens with the mushroom regen, and then at the end you wait a little bit, that's what this is, and then you are done. It's the end of the mushroom regen. So what actually happens to these mushrooms when you regenerate them? You create the explosion there, which is just that little like regen animation. You send the points to the manager, you set poison to false, health back to 0, and you reset the main frame. So for my poisoned and not poisoned, it's literally just a Boolean. That's set true or false, that's it. So you can undo that. And yes, I think that is it for mushrooms. So for mushroom field housekeeping, so basically how mine works is the game manager in the entity manager. The entity manager has a let me just get to the entity manager managers. GridManager. No, sorry. Game entity manager. The game entity manager has the GridManager. So when you create initialize, create all the entities for the game entity manager, you create the GridManager as well. And what is the GridManager? Well, the GridManager is in charge of the grid. So the main things that it has is the current mushroom field and the text block field. So my idea is that there's only ever one mushroom field active at a time, and it's just things on the screen. And that is an array of mushrooms, of mushroom pointers. So you just kind of load that in and out. So the things that actually hold like where the mushrooms are and stuff are the players. So the player has a thing called mushroom field data. And mushroom field data is just the data of, it doesn't actually contain any actual mushroom objects, it's just the data of where the mushroom should go. So mushroom data is a class, and it's literally just, hey, is this filled? Like, is there a mushroom here, and is it poisoned? I actually don't think you need the poisoned, I don't ever use it, but you just need to know if there's a mushroom there. So what the field data is just an array of these mushroom data. So it's just an array of the mushroom data where it just says, filled, not filled, filled, not filled, whatever. So this is just a representation of where the mushroom should be. It doesn't actually have any mushrooms in it. And each of the players has one of these. So the player has his own corresponding mushroom field. So at the beginning of the game, whenever you create a new player, you actually give him a new mushroom field data. Then when you initialize that field data, this is kind of where you decide where the random mushrooms are going to go. So you loop through, it's a 1D array, but you're kind of treating it like a 2D array. And you check, hey, should I drop a mushroom here? And then you say, okay, it's filled or not filled. And once again, this is just a marker for where the mushroom should be. It's not an actual, there's no actual mushroom pointers here. So this is just a marker. So each player has this field data. Right. And then, so the grid manager is the guy who's actually in charge of holding the mushrooms, and he has the actual mushroom field. So in the grid manager, you call this function fill mushroom field from player data. So when you start like one player mode in the game manager, you call the grid manager and say, hey, fill the, fill in player one's data. This was gonna be used more when if I was gonna do 2 players, which I didn't end up implementing. But when you would switch between player 1 and player 2, you would just, load in player 2's, mushrooms based on the markers, if that makes sense. So when you're loading in the information, you're just looping through, the rows and columns. You have the pointer to the player's mushroom field data, and all you have to check is, well, you have to check if there was already a mushroom there in the old, field, get rid of it. Just mark that sucker for destroy. But if in the array that marks where the mushrooms are for the player, that mushroom field data, if it is filled there, then you create a mushroom there. So once again, my grid manager has the 2D array of mushroom pointers, but it gets the information from the player. So how do I update this? When you create a mushroom, you actually are creating the mushroom, and then you're pinging the grid manager, hey, make sure you actually put this mushroom in your field. So I insert the mushroom into field is I update the count, and I have to update the player manager too, right? Like I have to say, hey, this is where there's a mushroom here now. When you are initially loading the data, this is like irrelevant because it just sets it to true, even though it's already true. Like that's why it's doing it in the first place. But if you're creating mushrooms later, you need to update the player data, the mushroom field data in the player. Anyways, in the current mushroom, you go ahead and set the mushroom that you just created in this array. And then same goes when you remove from the field. If we go back to the mushroom, I think it's actually in mushroom bullet hit, or bullet hit when you die, you say, hey, grid manager, remove me from the field. And so once again, you have to update the player data to make sure that, next time we load this information, we're not going to load a mushroom here. And then we have to set this to null in the grid manager's mushroom field. And then back in the mushroom takes care of destroying itself. So hopefully that makes sense. Yes. The only other thing with the grid manager is that I also have the text block. So the text block is just another 2D array, which is the same representation, of the screen. Text block is just once again, it's just a struct. It's just like saying that something is there. It's kind of empty, like there's not an actual game object, it's just kind of like a marker. So in the grid manager, when we do the inspect, which the Centipede uses in the FSM, where is inspect? Inspect, we have to get the mushroom to see if there's a mushroom there, but we also have to get the text block and see if there's a text block there. And if either of those are, if there's a mushroom or if there's a text block, the answer is 1, which means it's blocked. So yeah, that's kind of how the text interacts as well. Okay, let me see how long this video has been. I'm going to pause this one here and then keep going in a second.